Creativity is always present, and it's just that we have not authorized it, we haven't called it forward from people. You have artists who really have a gift that they have become powerful in being able to express. But everyone has creativity. I grew up in the 7th Ward of New Orleans, and I was the granddaughter of a Baptist minister. My father was his son, and he and my mother married and lived with my grandparents. Because it was the 7th Ward, Catholicism was a lot more popular there than being Baptist was. But he was a pretty well-known Baptist minister. And Papa and my grandmother were my earliest influences. If you're connected to a pastor, then your life evolves around the church. So the whole notion of community was very defined. They're called congregations, but that's what it was community. You were happy with people when they were happy, you were sad with them when they were sad, when they were in trouble, you were trying to help them, and everybody was trying to do better and trying to be good people. The influences that I got were certainly my beginnings to be like really an appreciator of art or music and spoken word. Storytelling. My grandfather, it amazed me to see him at 3 years old, holding people's attention and saying important things. And then my grandmother's pattern was to tell me stories and poems at night when I went to bed. That was what was going on there. And then my mother was spirited. So she kind of gave me kind of like a sense of the power of communications and words. I was not aware of the fact that I could be considered a writer until I had my first job. Joe Carmichael was my boss, and he was doing lobbying work, but he was also in charge of grants for the school board. I was a planning assistant, primarily responsible for outreach and community engagement. But when we came down to grants, the whole office had to, help. And so what he did was the Teacher Corps opportunity came in, and he gave me the guidelines, and he said, "Pal, get me a draft together." And so I took I just took the thing and looked at it and looked what the questions were and gathered up the information and wrote a draft and gave it to him. And so, and I went on about my business, and he called me back in and he gave it back to me, and he said, I wasn't half bad. And when I looked at it, I think there was only like about 4 or 5 like comments that he'd made, and he was an old newspaper guy, And so it was the first time that it occurred to me, I started to notice that writing in some instances was sometimes my first voice. That when I wrote things down, I better understood what I was thinking. My first roommate was a poet, and she kind of introduced me to kind of the cultural landscape here. Started going to Free Southern Theater, and we started going to the Dashiki Theater and some of the other theaters. And again, because I was this coordinating, writing, communications kind of person, before I knew it, I had situated myself inside of that community, and I became like the producer for the Black Arts Festival, Black Theater Festival rather, that was going on in the city. And it always starts with just wanting to help. Doug was a friend of Greer Goff Mendy. He used to do a lot of the visual art design work for programs and flyers and that kind of thing. He also did a lot of the design work for Tambourine and Fan. And so in a certain way, as a local artist, he became somebody's work that I could recognize. We put together and created a production called The Origin of Life, an African creation myth. It's the African myth of creation. And it's a dance theater work. We were struggling finding the funds to do all of the things we were doing, and being able to serve, Doug his household and me being able to serve mine. And I was trying to figure out, how, where was this money going to come from to get this space, So I just said, this is it's a great idea, but I don't see how we can do it. Doug wanted to do it immediately, but we were partners, so it was kind of like, well, I guess we won't do it. About 6 months later, when I discovered with all of the pieces of things that I was having in a store and, the rehearsals that you had to have for the this, that, and the other, and it was just a constantly running around trying to find space. This is how I came to appreciate, that every place I went, I was asking somebody white for a key to be able to be in the thing, And so finally I said, well, we're going to do it. And what we did was we initially got the space, not in Ashe's name, but in the name of Doug's company, which was Red House, so that the board couldn't tell us that we had to get rid of it. And that's how we got started, and with an eye toward making enough money to, we thought, to pay the rent and all of this. And then Kathy said, look, there's nobody in the building. She said, and so you all can be there rent-free, just get your insurance and your utilities paid. She said, until somebody moves in. When somebody moves in and they're paying rent, then you'll have to pay rent, And so that's how we got started. And we got about, anywhere from 4 to 6 months of rent-free. We started off struggling, with getting people, I was, again, to be able to look at how the system works, So now here, at that point in time, I had worked for the city, for the school board, and had helped to write grants that were in the multi-millions. I'd worked for the city, and we probably had brought almost $100 million of funding into the city. And when we came here and started writing grants and all, people were giving us $1,500, $2,500 and saying, well, we're going to see what y'all are going to be able to do here. That was then, you were doing that, now you're doing something different. I've always kind of operated like this. I can show you better than I can tell you. And so that's what we did. We just said, oh, so that's how this is going to go. All right, and then we just rocked on. We learned to take opportunities when they presented themselves. We learned to get our story out as often as we could. And then Katrina happened. And the lights went out in New Orleans. This little flickering, candle-y effort that was over here started becoming a beacon, because we were able to be back and to be open in 6 weeks. And so we became somebody that people could see, a place that people could go, a place where people could make investments. And so funders who were not, didn't even know who we were, came to know us. And we began both receiving, but also being a conduit so that others could manage to receive. We became a place where, things were happening. The ballet, whenever they brought a black company in, they did a community engagement thing over here. So, that period of up to 2010, particularly after 2005, there were a lot of opportunities, and we were dedicated to trying to be able to do stuff. And during that period also, Doug was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so one of the things we wound up doing is having to say goodbye to him in 2007. And then in 2009, Jeffrey, who was the first person who moved into the building, we wound up saying goodbye to him. And I came to appreciate the fact that we were doing a work that needed to live past all of us. We were building an institution that was necessary today, but that was going to be needed even more in the future. And this is why we're so proud of the next generation of leadership that we have here with Asali and Frederick, known as Hollywood. Nobody would know who Frederick was. He's so known by Hollywood. Because both of them were artists that have been in and around Ashe from almost its beginnings. I really began to think about the whole notion of this rudimentary bedrock role that culture plays in everybody's life. That the more you are situated and rooted in who you are, it strengthens your capacity to either stray away from or to continue. Culture is core. Art is critical, and that these things are tied to creating a society where values that support equity and justice can grow. We will never get to that place until we cultivate a culture in America that supports equity and justice. And that means that we have refined our rituals, that we have created a language, that we've worked through the things that we have to not say anymore and the things that we say instead of it, and we've made up new words even. And we understand how to interpret the things that have worked so badly against us in having a progressive society. We understand what systemic racism means, and we know how to look for it. We understand the power we have in civic and political will to be able to make a correction on that. And so until we can, create a way in which people are thinking, feeling, and acting in a social and cultural way, that we still have work to do.